As we come together for this period of inner work, let us set aside every thought of healing as something to be attained, or peace as something to be acquired. Let us approach this hour with the recognition that we are not here to get something from God, but to become still enough that we may discern what has been present from the beginning. Spiritual healing is never the act of a human mind working upon a condition. It is the dawning of a higher awareness that reveals the spiritual nature of what already is. And so, before we inquire into principles, before we speak of method, before we attempt to understand the nature of this sacred work, we pause not to think, not to ask, not to reach outward, but to open ourselves inwardly to the presence that moves upon its own accord. The healing presence is already here. It does not come because we desire it, nor does it depart because we forget it. It is the very life of us, the very soul of us, the very substance out of which our being is formed, and all the discord, the disease, the limitation we seem to encounter arises not from the absence of God, but from our unawareness of this indwelling presence. When this realization begins to dawn, not as a belief, not as a thought, but as a living experience, healing becomes as natural as light dispelling darkness, not by might, not by power, not by human will, but by the recognition of what is eternally true. As we continue, let us understand that no one here is asked to accept any doctrine or embrace any creed. Truth is never imposed. It reveals itself to the receptive heart. My task is not to give you truth, for truth cannot be given. My task is only to lift the veil a little, to bring your attention back to that quiet center within yourself, where the activity of God may be felt. When you touch that center, when you abide there even for a moment, you will discover that spiritual healing is not a miracle, nor the result of special powers. It is the natural outworking of realized oneness. So let us begin our study of this sacred subject on that foundation, that there is a presence, invisible yet ever present, silent yet always speaking, still yet eternally active. And it is this presence and this alone that heals. Our work is to become still enough to witness it. As we proceed, let us establish a foundation without which spiritual healing cannot be understood, practiced, or demonstrated. Every principle of the infinite way rests upon this one truth: God is the only presence, the only power, the only life. Not the greatest power, nor the strongest presence, nor one life among many, but the only. And when this truth is not merely believed but realized, you will find that discord begins to dissolve as mist before the sun. You see, the moment we accept two powers, good and evil, health and disease, abundance and lack, we have stepped out of spiritual reality and into the realm of appearances. It is in this realm of appearances that fear operates, where the mind imagines an opposing force, a second presence that can threaten or defeat the activity of God. Yet, if God truly is infinite, if God truly fills all space, if God truly embodies all law and all life, then there remains no place, no cows, and no substance for anything unlike God to exist. This is not a statement of blind optimism. It is the very nature of spiritual reality. When disease appears, it appears as a condition. When lack appears, it appears as circumstance. But the question before us is not whether these appearances seem real to the senses. The senses will always testify to duality, but whether they stand in the light of spiritual truth. And the spiritual truth is that God, the infinite presence, admits no opposite. If God were ever opposed, even for a moment, God would not be infinite. And so whatever appears as an opposing force exists only as a mental image accepted by the human mind, never as a presence or power in the realm of spirit. Understand this: we do not deny the appearance, we deny it power. There is a vast difference. To deny the appearance would be to resist what the senses reveal, and resistance always strengthens the appearance. But to deny it power, to recognize that it has no spiritual law to support it, no divine substance to sustain it, is to restore your vision to truth. And healing begins there, in the recognition that what God did not create cannot endure, cannot act, and cannot hold you in bondage. In this understanding, fear begins to dissolve. Fear can only exist where you believe there is something apart from God, something capable of operating outside divine law. When fear dissolves, the mind becomes still. And in that stillness, the presence reveals itself. That revelation is healing. Let this be our foundation. One presence, one power, one life expressing as the truth of all being. When you stand in that realization, you stand on holy ground, for you have acknowledged the allness of God and the nothingness of any supposed opposite. And from this point forward, every aspect of our work will rest upon this single truth. Let us move gently now into a principle that has confused many earnest seekers, yet stands at the center of every spiritual healing that has ever taken place. The nature of what we call error. If you can understand this clearly, not intellectually but spiritually, you will find that the burden of life begins to lift, for you will no longer struggle against the shadows of your own imagination. What is error? It is not a condition, and it is not a power. It is not a force acting upon you, nor is it an entity with will or substance. Error is simply the misperception of reality, the way the human mind interprets the world when it believes itself separate from God. In other words, error is not something out there, it is the absence of spiritual awareness in here. And because it has no spiritual foundation, error has no law, no cause, no continuity, and no actual presence in the realm of God. You may ask, if error has no reality, why does it appear so real? Why does pain hurt? Why does disease frighten? Why does lack seem to bind us? The appearance seems real for one reason only, because the human mind accepts it as real. The senses testified to the world of time, space, and physical form, and the mind, unillumined, believes that testimony. Yet the moment you begin to perceive from spiritual consciousness, the appearance is recognized for what it is, a temporary picture with no spiritual substance to uphold it, and in that moment of recognition, healing begins. We do not battle error. We do not resist it. We do not attempt to destroy it, fix it, or improve it. Any attempt to fight an appearance is an admission that it has power. That which you fight, you acknowledge. That which you fear, you sustain. But that which you recognize as having no spiritual law behind it dissolves of its own nothingness, for error cannot stand where truth is realized. Consider this. If you walk into a darkened room and mistake a rope for a snake, the fear is genuine. The heartbeat quickens. The body reacts. Yet the fear has nothing whatsoever to do with a snake, for no snake is present. The fear is based upon a misperception, and the moment the light is turned on, the fear disappears, not because the rope changed, but because your awareness changed. So it is with every discordant appearance. We do not change the appearance. We illumine the consciousness that misperceived it. You are not asked to declare, "There is no illness, there is no lack." Such verbal statements do little and sometimes worsen the struggle, for the mind attempts to convince itself of something it does not believe. Instead, you are asked to rest in the understanding that no form of discord has divine support, and therefore, whatever appears as pain, as limitation, as fear, is without true substance. You are asked to behold the appearance without granting it power. And in that very beholding, the truth reveals itself. Once you see that error is nothing more than the unilluminated mind's way of interpreting experience, you will cease fighting shadows and begin abiding in the light. And as the light of realization grows, the shadows recede, not by your effort, but by the nature of truth itself. This is the essence of spiritual healing, not the overcoming of reality, but the dispelling of illusion through the recognition of what eternally is. Let us now turn to the living heart of this work, the silent inner turning that forms the very essence of spiritual practice. If you understand this section, and if you embody it, even in small measure, you will possess the key to every healing, every revelation, every moment of peace that the infinite way has ever opened for its students. For all true spiritual unfoldment begins not in thought, not in emotion, not in effort, but in the quiet recognition of an inner presence that is always seeking to reveal itself. When we speak of the turning within, do not imagine an activity of the mind. It is not the mind turning to think a higher thought, nor the emotions turning to feel a spiritual sensation. It is the soul turning its awareness away from the world of appearances and toward the invisible source that animates all being. It is a shift so gentle, so effortless, that many overlook it precisely because it is not dramatic, yet the entire spiritual journey rests upon this very shift. In the beginning, you may find that the mind resists this silence. It wishes to pray in words, to ask for answers, to seek solutions, to outline the condition and the desired outcome. But this is not the way of spiritual healing. God does not respond to our words, nor does the presence alter its nature because we have spoken. The presence is eternally complete. What changes is not God, but our receptivity to God, and receptivity arises only in silence. To turn within is to release. For the moment, every concept of God you have ever held, not to deny them, but to let them rest. Be still and know is not a suggestion, it is an instruction in how God is known. God is not known by thinking about God. God is known in the space where thinking ceases, even for an instant, and the spiritual ear opens to the activity of the infinite within. This is the listening attitude. This is the inner altitude. This is prayer in its highest form. You may ask, what am I listening for? You are listening for nothing in particular. For the moment you listen for something, the mind has introduced its desires and expectations. You listen simply to be aware of the presence. You listen without attempting to guide the experience. You listen without seeking a message, a sign, or a sensation. You listen because in that listening, the activity of the Christ, the activity of spiritual realization begins to take place. Often, nothing seems to happen. But this nothing is not emptiness, it is fullness. In the silence where thought subsides, the spirit is at work. It may be hidden from the senses, but it is never inactive. Every moment spent in inner stillness is a moment in which consciousness is being prepared to receive truth. And when truth breaks through, it comes not as an answer to a question, but as a recognition: God is here, God is this, God is the life of all creation, and in that recognition, the appearance loses its power. Make this silent turning within a regular part of your day. Not long periods, though. You may find in time that long periods are given to you, but frequent moments of pausing. A minute before a conversation, a breath before a decision, 5 seconds between thoughts. These small openings allow the presence to announce itself, and soon you will find that this silence becomes more natural than the noise of the world. This is the heart of the presence practice. The gentle surrender of the personal sense of life and the quiet welcoming of the infinite that lives you, moves you, sustains you. In this stillness, healing is already underway, whether or not you perceive it, for the Christ is revealed only when the mind becomes a transparent instrument for the activity of God. As we continue our contemplation, let us look gently and clearly at how healing actually takes place. And again, we must release every trace of human thought about healing. For the world has taught us that healing is something we accomplish through prayer, through faith, through discipline, through treatment, through mental effort. But none of this is true. In spiritual work, healing is never a human accomplishment. Healing occurs only when the spiritual activity of the presence flows unobstructed through consciousness. You may wonder what obstructs it. Only one thing: the belief that we as separate beings must bring about harmony, the belief that we must think rightly, pray correctly, speak truth, hold faith, or fight against error. Every such effort forms a barrier. For wherever there is personal effort, there is the unspoken conviction that God is not enough, that the presence must be persuaded, activated, or helped. But the infinite does not need our help. It requires only our non-resistance. When the mind becomes still, when the heart releases its pleading, when the emotions settle into quiet receptivity, something remarkable takes place, though. Often it is so gentle that the senses do not detect it. The presence, which was always here, begins to reveal its own perfection, not because we sought it, but because we removed the interference that prevented its expression. You see, harmony is the natural state of being. It is not something introduced into us from outside. It is the very nature of the life of God expressing as the life of man. This chord is not an actual condition in consciousness. It is merely the resistance to the divine flow. And when resistance dissolves, even for a moment, harmony is restored spontaneously. Think of it in this way. Light does not need to struggle to enter a room. It does not push, nor strive, nor plead. The moment the shade is drawn aside, the room is filled. The light was always there. It was simply obstructed. In the same way, the presence is always shining, always active, always expressing its perfection. It needs only that the shade of personal sense be lifted. That is why we practice the silence. That is why we cultivate the inner turning, not to get God to act, but to allow God to be revealed. And when the presence is revealed, healing occurs naturally, inevitably, often quietly. Sometimes the outer form changes quickly, sometimes slowly, and sometimes not at all, but inwardly there is always healing. For healing is the dissolving of fear, the lifting of the veil of separation, the recognition of oneness. When that inner healing is attained, the outer world reflects it to the degree necessary for our spiritual unfoldment. Do not look for results. Do not measure the appearance. Do not watch the body or the bank account or the relationship for signs of change. These are shadows on the wall. Watch instead the inward sense of peace. For when peace comes, healing has already taken place. Whether or not the form has yet adjusted itself, the form will follow, but peace itself is the true evidence of the presence realized. In this way, healing without effort becomes not a mystery, but a spiritual law. When personal striving ceases, divine activity appears, and this divine activity is always present, always complete, always perfect. Our part is simply to stand aside to let the Christ reveal itself. Let us turn now to the nature of the practitioner, not the professional healer, not one who has been ordained or certified, but anyone who seeks to bring the light of spiritual awareness into human experience. And what I wish to make unmistakably clear is that the practitioner does not do. The practitioner does not heal, does not correct, does not improve, and does not send forth thoughts or energies. The practitioner simply witnesses the truth that already is, and in that witnessing, the activity of God is allowed to function without obstruction. This is an important principle. The practitioner is not a human being endowed with a special gift. If healing depended upon personal ability, it would be fragile indeed. No, the practitioner is one who has learned to become transparent to the presence, one who has learned to step aside from judgment, from fear, from desire, from personal will. In the degree that the practitioner ceases to assert a selfhood apart from God, the divine activity flows unimpeded, and what we call healing appears. The moment you attempt to change the condition before you, whether your own or another's, you have entered the realm of mental suggestion. You have left the infinite way. You have proclaimed, without meaning to, that God is not all and that you must fill in the gap. But spiritual healing does not fill gaps. It reveals that no gap ever existed in the presence of God. So the practitioner looks upon the appearance, the illness, the fear, the discord, and holds no reaction. Not coldness, not indifference, but the deep spiritual understanding that there is no power in the appearance. The practitioner does not deny the appearance. He denies it authority. He acknowledges that the senses may testify to discord, but he also knows that the senses do not testify to the realm of spirit, and so he rests gently in the truth that God is the only life, the only substance, the only presence. The practitioner sits quietly, without words, without effort. He listens, he waits, he becomes receptive, and in that listening, a subtle shift occurs, not in the outer condition, but in consciousness itself. A recognition dawns. All that God is present here. Nothing else has power. That recognition is the treatment. That recognition is the healing. And realize this, the practitioner does not send this realization outward to another person. There is no other. There is only one, life individualized in infinite form. When the practitioner attains the realization of the one presence, that realization touches whoever has turned to him not because he sent it, but because the one presence is universal, indivisible, and simultaneously present where the appearance is. Therefore, the role of the practitioner is a role of quietness, humility, and non-doing. It is a role of witnessing the spiritual truth that is eternally true. No effort, no manipulation, no influence over mind or body. Only the clear, silent awareness that God is the only reality and that nothing unlike God has law, substance, or continuity. When this witnessing becomes natural, when it becomes your reflexive response to discord, then you will discover that healing is not an act but a state of being. And in that state, whoever comes into your presence, whether physically or in thought, is touched by the same invisible grace that supports the universe. That is the role of the practitioner, not to heal, but to stand still and behold the truth. Now we come to a very practical aspect of our work, though even the word practical must be understood in its spiritual sense. For we are not seeking to improve the human scene, nor are we attempting to make the world more harmonious by human effort. What we are learning is how to carry the consciousness of the presence with us into every moment of the day, so that divine harmony may reveal itself wherever we are. Many believe that spiritual realization belongs only to the quiet hours of meditation, that the sense of peace attained in the silence is fragile and easily lost once we step into the activities of daily living. But this need not be so. In fact, the purpose of those periods of stillness is to train the consciousness to make it natural for the mind to turn within. Even when the outer world appears busy, the goal is not to remain in a meditative state apart from life. The goal is to live from the center even as we move through the world. You may find that as you go about your day, opportunities will arise, subtle ones, small ones in which you feel the pull of fear, irritation, judgment, or anxiety. In these moments, you are not asked to correct the condition, nor to exert control over yourself. You are asked only to pause within, even if for a single breath, and remember, there is only one presence here, and I am resting in it. That simple remembrance, when genuine, dissolves the emotional disturbance. It restores your vision. You begin to see that every encounter, every conversation, every decision becomes a place of practice. Not a place of striving, but a place of recognition. You meet a person, and instead of seeing a personality with faults or virtues, you quietly acknowledge the presence expressing in that form. You face a challenge, and instead of reacting with fear, you remember that whatever the senses report is only an appearance, and that behind the appearance stands the unchanging life of God. These quiet moments of recognition, sometimes a second, sometimes a brief, inward turning, accumulate. Each one deepens the consciousness of oneness, and as this consciousness deepens, you will notice something remarkable. Outer conditions begin to respond, not because you manipulated them, but because the consciousness through which you perceive them has changed. When you carry the awareness of the presence into your work, you find yourself guided without effort. Ideas come when needed. Solutions arise without strain. When you bring the presence into your relationships, conflicts soften, harmony appears, misunderstandings dissolve, not because you reasoned your way through them, but because the Christ within you recognized the Christ in the other, and that recognition is transformative. Do not think of this practice as something added to your day. It is simply a quiet remembering, a gentle return to the center. Whenever you notice you have wandered, no condemnation, no discipline, only return, And each return strengthens the habit of spiritual awareness until eventually it becomes your natural way of being in time. You will find that the presence goes with you everywhere, not because you carry it, but because you finally realize it was always there, whether in silence or activity, whether in meditation or conversation, whether alone or among many, the same still, quiet presence lives you. And you begin to move through life not as a human personality navigating circumstances, but as a transparent instrument through which divine harmony expresses itself. This is how the presence becomes active in daily life, not by effort, but by remembrance, not by changing the world, but by abiding in the one who has already overcome the world. Up to this point, we have spoken of principles, God as the one, presence, the nature of error, the silence, the inner turning, the unobstructed flow, the witnessing consciousness. But a principle, no matter how beautifully stated, becomes meaningful only when it is lived. And so it is helpful, from time to time, to look quietly at what happens when these principles move from intellectual acceptance into spiritual realization, not to create expectation, but to illustrate how naturally harmony appears when consciousness is aligned with truth, when the presence becomes a felt reality, even in small measure. The first transformation is always inner. Before any outward change, there arises a subtle but unmistakable peace, a peace that has no cause, no explanation, and no dependency on conditions. It is simply there, as if it had been waiting patiently for us to notice it. This peace is the evidence of the Christ. It is the first sign that the veil of separation has thinned. Then, without fanfare, one begins to see shifts in experience. I have known individuals who came to this work with great fear of illness, fear of financial insecurity, fear of loneliness. Yet as they began to rest in the silence, as they allowed the presence to reveal itself, that fear gradually dissolved, not because they solved their problems, but because they discovered that they were never meant to live by fear. They found an inner ground, and from that ground the appearances changed of their own accord. There was a woman who once sought help for a physical condition that caused her much distress. She tried affirmations, treatments, and many forms of prayer, but the condition persisted. When she came into the awareness that healing is not the removing of a condition but the recognition of spiritual wholeness, she stopped pleading and began listening. For a time, nothing seemed to happen, but one morning she awoke with a profound sense of God is here. That was all. No vision, no sensation, only that inner knowing. Within weeks, the condition had disappeared. Yet she would tell you that the real healing was not the physical change, but the peace that preceded it. Another man carried long-standing resentment toward someone who had wronged him. He struggled, fought internally, and tried to forgive in the way the world teaches forgiveness, declaring that he forgave, though inwardly still wounded. But when he turned within and recognized that there is only one life expressing through infinite form, something shifted. He saw that the person he resented was not a separate self, but an appearance of the same presence he sought to realize within himself. The resentment dissolved not because he tried to forgive, but because he could no longer see anyone to forgive. Shortly after, the relationship healed in ways neither could have orchestrated. And there are those who faced financial hardship. They did not use this teaching to attract supply or manifest prosperity. They simply learned to rest in the assurance that God is the source and substance of all being. They relinquished fear, relinquished the belief that supply comes from persons or conditions. And in that trust, opportunities appeared, support unfolded, needs were met, often quietly, gently, without drama. Again, the real miracle was not the supply that came, but the fear that left. For these are simple stories, unadorned, because spiritual unfoldment is seldom dramatic. The presence works in silence. It does not shout, it whispers. It does not force, it reveals. And those who stay with the practice long enough find that life becomes harmonious, not through effort, but through the natural outpouring of realized truth. When the presence is recognized, even faintly, harmony follows. Not always in the ways the mind expects, and not always in the time frame the world demands, but always in the way most conducive to spiritual growth. For the purpose of this work is not to repair the human scene, but to awaken the divine consciousness that alone is peace. These quiet testimonies remind us that spiritual truth is not theory, it is living, unfolding reality. And as we proceed into the deeper stages of this work, these transformations become not occasional miracles, but the natural rhythm of a life lived in awareness of God. And now, as we bring this period of contemplation to a close, let us not think of it as an ending, but as a gentle return to the awareness that this presence goes with us. For what we have explored together is not a theory, not a system, not a method to be applied only in moments of quiet. It is a way of living, a way of abiding in the recognition that God is the very life we are, and that all the harmony, all the peace, all the healing we seek flows naturally from that recognition. Nothing you have heard here needs to be remembered as words. The words are merely symbols, stepping stones, that help point the mind toward the deeper truth. What matters is the feeling of the presence, the quiet awareness that something greater than thought has been touched, however lightly. Hold to that, rest in that, even if it was only a moment, even if it seemed faint. It is enough, for once the inner light has been glimpsed, it never leaves you. Do not think that you must strive to maintain this consciousness. You cannot hold on to God, and you do not need to. The presence sustains you, you do not sustain it. All that is asked is a willingness to pause throughout the day, to turn within, to allow the Spirit to make itself known. These brief moments of recognition, these quiet openings of the heart, are what deepen your awareness, far more than long periods of effort. And so, as you return to your activities, let the silence go with you, not as an absence of sound, but as an inner stillness, a resting place that is always present, always available, always welcoming you home. You may find that as you continue in this practice, the presence will come to you in unexpected moments, in the midst of work, in conversation, in the simple act of walking across a room. It will make itself known, not because you have sought it, but because you have become receptive. Let your life become a series of quiet recognitions. Let each moment be an opportunity to remember, where I am, God is. In that remembrance, you will discover that healing is not something you do, but something you witness. Harmony is not something you create, but something you allow. Peace is not something you attain, but something you uncover. As we part, let us rest for a moment in silence, without words, without seeking, simply aware. aware that the presence is here, that the presence is always here, and that this presence is the life, the soul, the very being of each one listening. May this awareness go before you. May it enfold you. May it reveal itself in ways that transcend thought, and may you come to know through your own experience that God realized is indeed the only healing presence and the only power